Let's welcome in the fourth winningest coach in NHL history, almost 900 wins. Now doing some work consulting with the St. Louis Blues, but we know he is watching and watching very closely for no other reason, the sheer love of the game. Ken, how are you?
I'm well, Kyper. How are things there in Toronto?
A little better, but I'm not sure how much better, but maybe that's what you can tell us on. And, you know, you've been around the game a long time, and I'm sure you found yourselves in tough predicaments in the playoffs. But what is the difference? Can you sum up the difference between being down 3-0 and then being down 3-1, or are they quite similar?
They're not similar. You know, like 3-1, when you go from 3-0 to 3-1, you feel like you've got a little bit of momentum. When you're sitting at 3-0, you're as nervous as the team is that's trying to close you out. Like, everybody says the pressure's off us and all that stuff. That's a bunch of BS. When you're down 3, like, the feeling of getting swept is it's a pit in your stomach, and you want to try to avoid that. But I think the way Toronto played the game would give them a lot of confidence. It was a close game, but Toronto checked like crazy. They took away the middle of the rink. There were no second or third opportunities. I thought they played a hell of a hockey game, Kip.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on how much a team would make systems changes as a series progresses. Like, I just look at the Leafs. Game 1, there's a lot of pinching from Florida's D down the wall. After the next game, they're going off the glass and stretching it. Like, how much can you ask your team to play differently from game to game and still have success?
I think quite a bit. Not so much in the X's and O's, more in the tactics. So what I mean by that is that simple is smart when it gets to the playoffs. And whoever plays the simple, smart game and advances the puck usually ends up winning the hockey game. I thought Toronto, at the start of this series, they played way too much sideways, and they got burnt because of it. You know, there were too many lateral plays, and in the last game, they just advanced the puck, changed the territory, and then skated into it. And I thought they played a smart, conservative game that you can win all day with, and you can win 1-goal games, and you could win 2-1 playing like that. I thought if they bring that tactic with them again, I think they got a good chance to win the game.
Toronto Maple Leafs come in with a little bit of momentum off that win. There's no question about that, Hitch, but lots of talk about the Leafs and their lack of scoring. And then, of course, the finger gets pointed to Matthews and Marner and Tavares and Nylander. From your experience, Hitch, when you know that your stars have so much more to give, how do you handle the approach to them? Is it really, do you have to really be methodical on what you do or what you say publicly or behind closed doors, or is it just something that happens naturally?
No, I don't think it happens naturally, Nick. I think I've always said there's a big difference between looking for space and fighting for space. And the playoffs are about fighting for space. And whether it's Marner, Matthews, Nylander, it doesn't matter. Whether it's Tkachuk, any of those guys, Barkov, whoever fights for space usually ends up scoring goals. And to me, if you're talking about scoring, you're talking about scoring chances, you have to win the fight for space. You look at what Dallas did last night. You know, they kept Seattle to the outside the whole night, and there's got to be a change in attitude where you're willing to dig in, you're going to go in those hard areas, and you're going to fight to keep your space there. And if you don't, you're going to be looking for one and dones, or you're going to be looking from the perimeter all the time. And that's the difference. Everybody has to buy into that, even your most skilled guys.
So, Hitch, I need you to be honest here. Is that the exact same conversation that you would have with a guy like, I don't know, Brett Hull? Or are we talking a whole new kettle of fish here?
No, not so much Hully, because he could hide on the ice, and he knew angles that you see 20 years later now. But I had those conversations with Modano. And, you know, I've had those, and I've had them with other guys too, that you got to go get dirty and the score will happen and goals will come, but first you got to be involved in the dirty part of things. And Mo bought in. I mean, he became, for a period of about 6 years there, probably the best two-way player in the world, and yet he had a reputation of being a scorer, but he went into the hard areas when it really mattered.
How typical is it to get someone to do that, to make a change to their game? You know, obviously, you're thinking about the Leafs and their stars, not a ton of aggressive guys, but Modano wasn't that either. You know, how common is it to get a guy who typically thinks one way to say, hey, you got to come back, you got to battle for pucks? Is that something that's even doable long term?
Well, you've got to convince them that it's a fight for us and not them. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is when you do the hard stuff and you go into the hard areas, you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for someone else on your line, someone else on the bench, someone else who's injured. You got to convince the players that what the hard things that you want to get them to do are for us. It stops being about them, and it's the more uncomfortable you can get them in there, it becomes even bigger for us, and that's the convincing that has to take place.
We're talking to one of the most winningest coaches in NHL history, in Ken Hitchcock. Hitch, you can look into matchups all day long, and then there's the matchup between a head coach and the other guy across the bench. And two coaches that, sure, Hall of Famers, I think, when it's all said and done, and John Cooper and now Paul Maurice have been a huge challenge for Sheldon Keefe here. What do you see out of Paul Maurice in his coaching career, and a guy that you've gone up against?
Well, I don't know how much coaching he's doing. He's doing a lot of observing, and he's doing a little bit of cheerleading, but he did all his coaching to get into the playoffs, and he had to coach his butt off. And I think he regained the passion to drive people, and now he's just letting them play. Like he looks calm, he looks relaxed, and even when it's really wound up, he recovers quickly because he's been through this to get into the playoffs. He had to really drive the bus hard in January and February, and he did it. And I think he's got more confidence now than he's ever had, and he's really, really enjoying it. You know, he's having a good time. You can see it in the interviews. You can see it in his disposition and his confidence. He's done a hell of a job, quite frankly.
Hitch, you've never stopped watching the game here. And one of the stranger things that I'm sure you've noticed is that offense is actually up in the playoffs. And last year it was the same thing. Offense went up in the playoffs, and that's not been typical of playoff hockey. What's changed, if anything, about the way some of these playoff games are being played?
Justin, you know what it is who wins the pinch game? Mm-hmm. Everybody's got activating defensemen. And if you lose the pinch game, you give up a lot of goals. And what I mean by that is the timing and the backside support and the covering over. Everybody's got activating defensemen like crazy. And if you win that game, you keep it in the zone and you create offensive chance after offensive chance. And if you lose it, you're chasing back 2-on-1, 3-on-1, 3-on-2. So to me, who wins that pinch game is going to be successful. And that takes a lot of work by defensemen because there's a lot more skating involved now than there's ever been.
Leafs definitely won the pinch game in Game 4, and that'll be a huge one tonight as well. But they were able to do it, Hitch, with 7D, keeping Giordano in. They got an extra day of rest out of him. He looked so much better. But overall, I mean, I wrote about it today in an article for the Toronto Star, but I'm starting to believe in 11-7 a lot more than I did in the past.
Yeah, I think if you've got dominant forwards, a couple of dominant forwards, 11-7 works really well. But if you've got just guys that can only handle their own shifts, then you're just throwing darts at a dartboard. I think Toronto's been able to get their top players on the ice way more, and that's helped. But I think also what's helped is that their skating legs on the back end, which weren't there at the start of the series, look like they're back in play now.
Yeah, it's a hopeful time here in Toronto. Just to take you outside of this series a little bit and get your thoughts on what's going on around the league. Carolina beating the Devils. Not sure how much of that you're able to see, but what did you make of that? Carolina's so injured, and the Devils obviously a very talented team.
Well, when Carolina plays man on man, and they got a lot of long bodies to play that game, they're extremely hard to play against. There's just no space to make a play. There's no space to get open. It'd be really interesting to see what other teams do to try to combat their style and their system. This is looking like, this is full knockout punch hockey in Vegas and Edmonton for me. This is everybody's taking swings early, and if you connect, you dominate. And if you don't connect, you're chasing the game. And these are haymakers being thrown by a lot of guys right now.
Speaking of Edmonton and Vegas, do you expect the officials to almost have a reset here in terms of style of officiating to start the next game based on the suspensions that we just saw from either side?
Not so much that, Nick. I think as series goes on and as the playoffs get deeper, the referees that excel are the ones that have a great feel. They know how to take it right to the edge and not let it go over the top. And I think that series is so wound up emotionally that, there's not much that's like a banjo string. There's not much that's going to make that thing snap. And I expect it to be a very emotional next two games. Whoever wins it, whatever. But there's going to be some really emotional hockey getting played now.
Funny because typically that happens early in a series, and then everyone's like, okay, we can't waste our energy on this sort of stuff, but it doesn't seem to be going away in this series. A lot of animosity. Do you think that plays in the favor of a team like Vegas, who maybe doesn't have the elite superstars and can kind of, can get Edmonton to muck it up with them a little bit?
No. Edmonton's got some nastiness to them that I don't think anybody realized. Yeah. I think the Oilers hit to hurt, and they play hard, and they're big and strong, and it's going to take a lot to push them out of this series. I really believe that because they're finally getting significant production every period from their role players, which they didn't before, but they are now, and that makes it for a really deep team to try to compete against.
What's funny for me, or at least so noticeable, is that nastiness and the edge that you just talked about. In many ways, are led by McDavid and Draisaitl, the guys that got 1,000 goals this year.
They're whacking and hacking with the best of them, and that's what's really interesting. When you see that in a team, when your top players are doing all the hard stuff, also that's like gold. Like that can carry you in a lot of series. And Edmonton's got that. Vegas had it, then they lose it, then they got it. I don't know which way they're going. Dallas has it. And quite frankly, so did Florida. And that was what was so impressive. Toronto's pushback. They pushed some of those guys that were showing up for Florida. They pushed them onto the back burner, which was good.
One more. Do you see Dallas winning another cup like yours this year? Do they have what it takes?
Yes, I think they do. Between the goalie and defense and experience, they got a combination. Hintz, Heiskanen, they got star players. But there's a lot of good teams playing really good hockey left in the West. So it's going to take a lot, but they got it in them. I think so.
Wow, it's going to be a great next couple of weeks, that's for sure.